Hello everyone. Ranjan will be moderating the session, the talks. I'm here primarily to make notes for my editorial stuff, and if there is anything, I'll barge in or pitch in or something. But yeah, have a good talk and happy Environment Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Wish you
happy
the same.
Environment Day to everyone. I did not know that people have started sharing it in emails as well. So earlier in the morning when Mr. Bagai, Atul Bagai from UNEP, he had sent an email. It was like in bold letters, Happy World Environment Day. So yeah, it makes sense now. We should start celebrating it. So happy Environment Day to all of us.
All of us, yeah.
To all of us.
Environment Day to all of us.
So to begin with, I think mostly all of us are aware about Paskitos and the initiatives that we're taking. That we're getting people together to primarily talk about the initiatives that matter for the politics domain. And environment is one of the focus areas that we've been writing about, that we have been talking about, sharing it in our newsletters, in our magazines. And of course, World Environment Day is quite important. And I sort of had a fear of missing out when there were so many events happening around webinars, seminars, conferences around, say, World Environment Day. So we thought, okay, we should probably also have some informal conversation, just get the domain stakeholders, people who are working in this space together, and have talks around the keywords that almost everybody is using. We're talking about sustainable development goals. We have 9.5 years left to achieve them. So what all we have been doing, what all our experiences have been. So I'll just make it this formal, a bit formal for like 2 minutes. Then we'll just get on to the informal conversations. Let me just introduce people who are in this panel. First, we have Mr. Ramji Raghavan. Mr. Raghavan is a social innovator and entrepreneur. He is founder and chairperson of Auguste International Foundation and chairperson of Navam Innovation Foundation. Ramji served as a member of Central Advisory Board of Education, Government of India. He is member of Governing Council of Marico Innovation Foundation and has also served as a board member of Working Group on Prime Minister's National Knowledge Commission. And the project that I like the most is their Kupam Center, which is like 50 football fields big, and it's like a more of a biodiversity project. So the conversation will ask Ramji to talk about that project. Moving on, next to him is Mr. Vivek Vishwas Rao. He's head biodiversity at Tata Power. So when most of us are still looking at new titles coming up at corporates wherein this like sustainability is taking space, so Tatas have moved a step ahead and they also have a head biodiversity. So we'll want to hear from him. When did it start? I think it was just last year when they started introducing head biodiversity as the designations. Apart from other sustainability focused initiatives, he spearheads the Mahasir awareness program, the outcomes of which are quite interesting. We'll want him to talk about that as well. He has co-authored books on wild orchids of northern Western Ghats and birds of Lonavala and Khandala. Next to him is Ms. Tejashwari Joshi. She is head environment and sustainability at Godrej and Boyce. Ms. Joshi has more than 18 years of experience in sustainability domain and leads Godrej Group's Good and Green Vision 2020. And now that we are in 2021, so we'll want to hear how much of that vision has been achieved and what are the targets that we could not meet. All right, yeah, she leads the company's initiatives that focus on zero waste, carbon neutrality, positive water balance, and also leads the renewable energy portfolio. Next to Tejashwari is our dear friend Raj Mohan. Raj Mohan is a climate reality leader, member of Al Gore Code that focuses on climate change. He is founder of Sustainable Green Initiative that, in partnership with many corporate groups, has planted more than 1 million trees. And he works in Sundarbans. And his Sundarbans project is worth talking about. So we'll want Raj Mohan also to talk about it. Moving on to the agenda for today, which is not practically not an agenda. All that we wanted just to share our experiences, the time that we've spent in the domain, things that have happened, that have not happened, and the goals that we are looking at in 2030. Do you think they are actually achievable? Do you think they are practical? We do have goals, we do have some plans around that, but in our individual experience, when we look at it, we believe in 9.5 years we'll be able to achieve all those SDGs. Let's not talk about all those SDGs, probably the environmental goals that we have for the country. Will they be achieved? So what I'll do is I'll just start tagging people. Maybe if they have missed out on something on the introductions, you can talk about that. You can talk about one project, one initiative that you think is the best initiative, either yours or somebody else's, that has got some good outcomes, that has been able to make an impact. And then your thoughts on 2030 goals. We can start on with Ramji.
Okay, now I have to say that all I can talk about is the Agastya experience. Okay, so I'm sure there are other people on the panel who have more enlightened views on the feasibility of achieving the sustainability goals by 2030. So if that is of interest, I can talk to you about the Agastya experience. Shall I do that?
Sure, Ramji. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So my interest in actually, I suppose, ecology goes back to my days as a former student of Rishi Valley, where the founder, Jiddu Krishnamurti, actually had a mystical relationship with nature. So nature was sacred, plants were sacred, the soil was sacred. All of this was actually sacred. I'm not saying that I have the same view or I imbibe the same view, but I grew up with a respect for nature and a general sense that this was very important, not just for human survival, but that it is important in and of itself. Okay? And then the years went by and I read a book before I started Agastya called The Ends of the Earth by Robert Kaplan, who talked about the eco-suicide of Central Asia. And he was very pessimistic about the future. I read this book, I think, in the mid-1990s. He was very pessimistic about the future until he visited Rishi Valley. And there he writes a chapter called Rishi Valley and Human Ingenuity, and how the people in Rishi Valley, Naidu and many other people, transformed that what was a relatively barren valley into a green valley. And he writes about the entire thing and concludes by saying that this taught him a lesson that transformation in ecology can't be infused from outside, from the west or the east or wherever. These solutions have to be homegrown. And the transformation of the Rishi Valley ecosystem was an example of how down-to-earth people came up with homegrown solutions. And therefore he concludes on an optimistic note saying, I think there is optimism if we follow this sort of approach. Now, when I started Agastya, I was looking for a large piece of land, and we got a 172-acre piece of barren, rocky wasteland near Bangalore in Andhra Pradesh. And I came from this background and I said, it'll be a nice thing to create an ecological preserve here, whatever that meant, because I wasn't and I'm not an expert on ecology. So soon a bunch of ecologists visited the campus, and one of them was the former chief forest officer of Karnataka, Yellappa Reddy. And he said, the soil is very interesting. And if you give me the opportunity to transform this, my colleagues and I will do it. And I believe we can then take this model and replicate it across peninsular India. And he talked about how different parts of India were worse than sub-Saharan Africa in terms of ecological devastation and so on. Water problems, the cows were not yielding enough milk. And they said, well, let's hybrid the cows, mate them with stronger cows. And his point was, what are the cows feeding on? There isn't enough feedstock for the cows. So you need to come up with an integrated approach of what he called agro-eco-forestry at that time. Anyway, fast forward 20 years from when we first met, the campus has been transformed into a place with about 600 different species of different plants. There are lots of concept gardens based on Ayurveda, Siddha, and so on. We bring in a lot of children because we're primarily an educational foundation. so children come and learn about the soil, the medicinal value of plants, and of course, to experience nature in and of itself. And then we said, look, the campus may be becoming a haven for many near extinct species and so on, but there needs to be an outreach. So we launched a mobile eco lab where we distributed saplings to nearby villages, educated them on how to regenerate the ecological capital of the village. And that went on for some time. And of course, the ecology learning for children. And now we have launched an ecology kit that we think we can send out to thousands of kids across the country. So this is, the Indian Institute of Science came and did a study on the ecological transformation of the campus, wonderful butterfly park, dimensioning the bird species, biodiversity has grown, all that within 172 acres. So that's not going to change the world, but it's a good, very good experiment. The thing is, even with this, what I've found is, while we all talk about climate change and when there's pollution, we talk about, hey, what do we do about pollution in Delhi? And there are water shortages all over the country. Now we don't talk about it because of COVID. We seem to keep reacting to problems in India. We don't take some bets, some enlightened bets, some of them might turn out to be wrong, and act ahead of the problem. Like, Rishi Valley did in the 1990s. Things become fashionable when it reaches a crisis proportion. I think COVID has shown that in spades, okay? Because we go back to our old behavior. Now, from our own foundation standpoint, we've raised a lot of money, some 700 crores over the last 20 years for various educational projects. I don't think more than 1 crore of that, or maybe 50 lakhs, was for ecology, because the donors are simply not turned on by it. While the news channels and the Paris Accords and all the great work that some of the panelists here have done, planting 3 million trees is no joke. I have found it very difficult to convince prospective donors to raise money for this. Okay? And it is, so I find a gap, and it sort of confused me. Maybe I haven't been proactive enough, but whatever, net, that has been our experience. And I wish we could go and regenerate Peninsular India, but I wouldn't even know who to talk to about helping me in this initiative, especially from a funding standpoint.
Ramji, I'll cut you short here. Let's make it like a conversation thing. Maybe Tejashri or Mr. They can come in and just present us with the corporate's perception also. Because what I see, Godrej has been investing a lot in biodiversity. Tata Power has invested a lot towards projects. They even have a department on biodiversity now. So is there like the companies want to do everything themselves, or they actually get into partnerships? Like, this is not a question, obviously we're primarily focusing on the subject, the topic that we're discussing about and all, but maybe you can mention something around this as well. Anybody can take it, either Tejashri or Mr. Vivek.
Today?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I come in?
Yes.
Sorry? Saurabh.
Please.
I think, Vivek is there.
Can I come in? This is Vivek.
Yeah, let Mr. Vivek speak then I'll.
Any of you, yes. Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, good evening and happy Environment Day. So I'm based in Lonavala actually. Am I audible?
You are,
Hello?
but the voice is a little bit interruptive. Yes, probably we can shut your video and then talk.
Oh,
Might get a
the
better
connectivity
bandwidth.
here is a bit low. I'm based at Lonavala. Am I
Yeah, now
audible?
you're audible. Yes. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I'm based at Lonavala actually. We have a hydropower plant over here, and we have around 36,000 acres of land, and that too in the northern part of Western Ghats, which is a biodiversity hotspot. So we thought that this is an opportunity for us to have a baseline survey done, see what is there, what was earlier there, and now what is there. So we did the baseline survey, and then we started documenting a lot of things. So we have studied on the birds of Lonavala and Khandala. We have studied on the wild orchids of the northern Western Ghats. We have studied reptiles, and we have also studied our aqua diversity of all our lakes. So we see for ourselves a huge opportunity to plant a lot of saplings to protect the areas. We are more into protection. That is what we want to do in our areas, because we believe in protection to habitats will not only save one species but will save a lot of species. And over a period of time, we have come to know that the number of species has been increasing, the number of bird population has been increasing in this area. So it's a very good sign as far as the environment total biodiversity is concerned, that we are looking at a holistic picture, not only of conserving one species, but looking at them, because 36,000 area gives us an opportunity, and that too around a lake, and that too in the northern part of Western Ghats. It's a huge opportunity for us to protect this area, and that is what we are exactly trying to do. So one of the species of Mahashir actually, which was on the verge of getting extinct. So it is a very interesting story actually, that the first alarm call of this fish getting extinct came from the community. The community used to worship this fish as a god fish, or Devmasa, what we used to call, because it has got barbels. So these local people used to say that it's a fish which is wearing a nattani, the birds wear the nattani. So they used to feel that they used to worship this. So as they were worshipping, one fine day they came to know that slowly the population of this fish is decreasing in the Indrayani River and the Mulamukha River. So the call went to the fisheries department saying that, can you help something to do with this fish? Since we were very close to the Indrayani River, the fisheries department approached us saying that you have lakes over here, can we do something to conserve this fish? And that is how Tata Power entered into the fisheries. So earlier we were not really very tuned to the habitats of this Mahashir. So CIFE helped them. In 1970-71 we started breeding this fish. Now this is the only hatchery in India which is around 4 to 5 lakhs of fries every year, and with the help of the respective state department fisheries, we are releasing. So overall picture of total biodiversity we are looking at. This is what in short I could say.
Great.
We are still documenting, we are still learning, we are open for education. We are open for educational institutions. A lot of students with biodiversity, what are the different types of birds, butterflies. 2 students are doing their PhD on Mahashir. So from education point of view, we are absolutely open, and we would also like to exchange our thoughts. Maybe what we have experienced, we would like to share it with others, and probably we would also like to hear the experiences of others. So all of us, if we are on a common ground, then probably we can all together contribute towards a great environment.
Great, yes, and that is the purpose of this interaction anyway.
Thank you.
Just learn from our experiences. Yes, thank you so much. And yes, this Mahashir has also gone off the extinct list now. No? It's not a endangered species anymore.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, actually, we recently found the IUCN list, and till 2012 was listed as an endangered species. Now it has come to least concern. So the paper also appreciates the contribution of Tata Power. Of course, along with Tata Power, there were a lot of other people also, different state government departments, NGOs who have contributed, the community, the scientists. So a lot of content, but this was an initiative taken by Tata Power, and finally after 50 years, we were successful. So it's a very long story of 50 years. But we are very happy to say that finally the species has come out of the endangered list, and still a long way to go.
Yes, wonderful. It's a great initiative. It's just one species. There are 100 more that we have to look at, and it's just not the species of say aquatic animals, but then there is a biodiversity conservation means a lot, and there's obviously a lot to be
There are a lot of plants, birds. Yes, sir.
And coming to Tejashri, you wanted to pitch in about the corporate NGO partnership primarily on the environmental part, and of course,
Yes.
initiatives of yours.
Yeah. Before I go into corporate and NGO ecosystem, which actually helps, I would just briefly like to introduce how we started on the biodiversity and what was those triggers that actually made us more conscious, or Godrej boys more conscious about this. The land which was actually initially procured in Vikhroli by an indenture in 1940s had this luxuriant patch of mangroves along its eastern boundaries along the Thane Creek. And it was primarily bought for development of industrial township when the business was really growing. But while doing that, late Mr. Sorabji Godrej, who was an environmentalist himself, and he was the first president of WWF in India. So he realized that here is one unique ecosystem, which is different from what you see in the terrestrial area. But although at that point of time it was called as a marshland or some wasteland rather, he was quite passionate, and he understood that this is different and needs to be conserved because probably it has much more ecological value than it is perceived today. And therefore, there were obviously, being in the heart of a mega city like Mumbai, a suburb like Vikhroli, which is actually at that point of time, somewhere in the 80s, huge real estate development pressures on all the lands that were there in Mumbai. This was I think, a brave decision and a very futuristic decision that the Godrej family took, that was to conserve this land in its natural state for posterity. And for doing that, the Sunabai Pirojsha Godrej Foundation was formed in 1985, and this entire land of mangroves was brought under the conservation effort under the Sunabai Pirojsha Godrej Foundation. And then the real efforts on conserving started, formal efforts I would say on conserving started. The first thing was to understand the ecosystem, because there was very little understanding about it at that point of time. Forget about any rules or laws being there to protect it, but very few people really knew what it entails. And there was a detailed PhD thesis which was commissioned by the company, and the initial managing committee for when this started was actually we had very I would say noted individuals who were part of it, and like Dr. Salim Ali, Dr. A.K. Ganguly, Dr. Homi Setna, Admiral Auti. I mean, they were stalwarts in conservation at that point of time, and they guided us through on how to take this ahead on formalizing it. And the first thing, like I said, we commissioned a study to understand the ecosystem, and with that also the emphasis was on to create more awareness, and which was the basic thing which was lacking. So a three-pronged approach was developed on research, conservation, and awareness. And it was decided that we take on all the three indicators to progress on this conservation initiative. So research entails understanding the ecosystem, like Mr. Vivek was saying, documenting the species, know what is already there in the species, also understand what was there and has been degraded so far and has a potential to regenerate over there. So after this detailed study was done, the intervention started in terms of introducing species. So it was identified that this area actually had 11 true mangrove species in itself, other than a dominant species being there of the grey mangroves. But the other species were also found, and many of them had degraded over a period of time. And so there was reintroduction of those species at the right appropriate places based on the physiology and hydrology of the area. At the same time, looking at how do we protect the land, because in Mumbai, there are different challenges when you are in an urban setting. So there were encroachments, there were illegal activities happening in non-accessible areas, and mangroves at times are quite non-accessible during the tide movements. So the first important thing was to protect. And if you can protect the environment, it really regenerates itself with very minimal of interventions. So, and we also saw to it that the interventions happen at the periphery, not really disturbing the core of the forest, but how you could help it doing peripheral interventions and protect it against the pollutions that happen. So a large part of degradation of mangroves in Mumbai was the pollution, which was there in the city, the solid waste which was going into the creek. It was the wastewaters which were going into the creek. So as an organization, the basic concept was started was all our upstream industrial activities have to be as responsible that mangroves become the indicator of its success. And with that principle, today you were talking about the good and green principles, the strategy on sustainability. Today it's a zero waste to landfill campus. It's not today. I mean, we did it in 2014.
This is the part of the vision that you had for 2020.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. So we did not just keep it limited to the manufacturing activities, but realizing that the entire township existed because of the industry, we actually extrapolated to the entire township, and the whole township is zero waste to landfill township. Since 2014, we have not sent even a single kg of waste to any of the famous dumping grounds of Mumbai.
It's only the township we're talking about, or we're talking about Godrej and Boys being zero waste?
It is Godrej and Boys which is zero waste. Right now, when I'm talking about in the context of mangroves, it is the township in Vikhroli as well. So it is as well, other than, all the manufacturing activities.
Very interesting.
Yes. It's a zero discharge campus. We recycle all the wastewater. There is rainwater harvesting, much more than what we actually withdraw from the ground. So these are, basic indicators. And what it starts actually demonstrating is how healthy is the biodiversity you're conserving because of these upstream activities. And to actually capture that, we started doing the biodiversity indexing of the location. So a basic biodiversity index, which is based on Singapore City's biodiversity index, was adopted. And I think we are one of the first corporates in the world to actually adopt that index. And that's what we got a validation from Singapore City. And so it actually told us where we are standing in terms of a healthy biodiversity index. So it also pointed out what are more areas of improvements that we could take up in terms of, eliminating invasive species, seeing that they don't proliferate. We replace it with more sustainable and indigenous species, which actually support the local biodiversity and microfauna. And also identify small pockets of biodiversity kind of hotspots within the campus, which could be further developed. Another important indicator, it also threw out that it is an urban setting that we are today looking at. And how do you integrate biodiversity in the urban context? What are those urban practices you follow for managing of your green cover? Because we have many trees which are quite old now. And how do you sustain them? How do you increase their life? What are those horticulture practices you imbibe in your processes which improve their life? How do you build areas for more nesting of birds, more proliferation of species in terms of local species? So there are many things. I mean, I would again come back.
Understood, yes. Now, before we move on to Raj Mohan, talking of mangroves, he has done a lot of work in biodiversity. There are from projects, obviously, some initiatives that you talk about. Rajeshri, one last thing, is there anything happening around the awareness of the community which is in there, starting from?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so see, through the mangroves, basically, I said one of the pillars was awareness. And for awareness, we started this center for having people come to the mangroves. And it's not only mangroves is an indicator of ecology and how important it is for cities like Mumbai as well. Through it, we started a lot of awareness programs for kids, for children on environment, biodiversity, why conservation is important. Every year, we have more than 200 schools coming to the area as part of their regular curriculum for kids from, right from 2nd, 3rd standard to up to 7th, 8th, 9th standard. We have students coming for doing their research on the ecology per se, who are MSc students or PhD students doing their doctorates in this. So, so we were doing on-ground awareness sessions, almost to the tune of, 6,000, 7,000 people coming every year to see the mangroves. But not limiting to that, and after, particularly the pandemic hit, we started thinking, how do we reach out? How do we go beyond the pandemic?
I'll come back on the pandemic part again, because we're going to talk about that. Let me move on to Raj Mohan immediately. Raj Mohan, how has been your experience? See, now we have Tatas and Godrej here. We don't have the corporates that you have also worked with. And I'll ask them how it is difficult to reach out to the boards to convince them to invest into biodiversity projects, and how we look at the SROIs through conservation projects. How has been your experiences? First, talk about one initiative that is, of course, the celebrated initiative from the Sundarbans, and then obviously your experiences with the corporate groups in getting those such projects scaled up, and how you've been investing in them. You're on mute, yes. Raj, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ranjan. A small correction to the introduction.
Sure.
As of date, we have planted 3.4 million trees across India, which includes about 500,000 mangroves. But I am sitting here in front of some real huge stalwarts who've been in biodiversity and other areas working for the last 30 to 50 years. I mean, oh my God, right? I started about 9 years ago, and prior to that, the interesting part is I used to be in an area where cutting trees was the done thing. I was in publishing, so we were cutting a huge amount of trees. And I was into Yellow Pages publishing, so you know, a huge amount of pulp and paper is required for publishing Yellow Pages. And somewhere when the Yellow Pages industry per se was going down the tube, my maker asked me, shall we, I want to give you a chance to kind of put back the trees that you have cut back on earth. And I kind of clung on to it. I have no idea as to, I'm not an expert. I'm basically more a tree cutter than a tree planter. Came into this field by some chance of fate. But we've been extremely lucky. When we started 9 years ago, like Ramji said, I attended a TIE meeting in Calcutta, and this gentleman who was an ex-president of TIE from the US, he said initially, people who invest in your dream are friends, family, and fools. So I had a fair amount of fools who invested in my dream. We used to get somebody, you know, some alumni, some classmate calling me and say, my daughter's birthday or my son's anniversary, can you plant 5 trees for me, 10 trees for me? There was no CSR in those days. CSR came in much later. So we used to plant very small quantities of trees, 1,000 trees, 2,000 trees. In the first year, our target was an ambitious 10,000 trees, and we planted 1,000 trees. So, and it kind of progressed from there. This year, we will be planting the same amount of trees that we have planted in the last 9-10 years. We probably plant about 5 million trees. We have evolved the model. The model was initially, the corporates wanted us to do CSR. They wanted us to plant in the vicinity of their head office or factories. Now land, like all of us know, in urban areas is extremely difficult to get. And even if you get land, there is no guarantee that the trees that we plant and maintain on that are going to survive for a long time. So we took various approaches. Being an entrepreneur, I went left, went right, went center, trying to find what would be the right way to do this. We worked with paramilitary forces. We worked with army in army land. We worked with in police land. But everywhere we came across one very interesting issue that if there was an order from the Home Ministry that you had to plant 5,000 trees in this particular campus, all the trees that we had nurtured for 2 years would suddenly get tractored. And for that particular event, a new set of trees would be gotten and they would be planted and nobody would take care of it. So while we had started way back, our elders had told us that the biggest challenges facing the 3,000 to 5,000 kilometer radius of where we live in India is hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. Because 2/3 of the world's population lives in this very small parcel of land. And if we planted fruit trees, we would be doing everybody a great benefit. It would fight hunger, it would fight poverty, it would fight malnutrition. But we really didn't have any understanding as to how to go about it till one of our early CSR partners, Hero MotoCorp, out of a huge number of trees that we have planted, almost 7.5 lakh trees that we planted for them, they said, okay, plant 50,000 trees in a village in Ghaziabad. And that's where we started with working with small farmers. World-renowned fact, everybody knows that 80% of the land that can be used for planting trees is owned by small farmers. And fruit trees on farmland can help increase the sustainable livelihoods, increase the productivity, increase water retention, everything, biodiversity, everything in that particular area. So we started with these 50,000 trees, and then we were fortunate to get some great support from international tree planting organizations like Ecosia, which is a German search engine, where for every search you do, they plant a tree. An organization called One Tree Planted from the US, we are one of their large partners. Earth Day Network, and then of course Algo's Climate Reality Network, with whom we've been doing some work both in terms of fruit tree as well as mangrove planting in the Sundarbans. So today we have our own nurseries. Earlier we used to bring plants from outside. We realized that is a huge logistics exercise. We're putting out more carbon initially. So we started developing our own nurseries. We have 2 nurseries on the outskirts of Delhi, one in Palwal and one in a place called Bagot, which is in Bagpat district. Both poised to, at this point in time, both have 1.5 million fruit trees saplings getting ready for the next season, which starts during the monsoons. We have a nursery in Jhansi, and we have one coming up on the outskirts of between Haryana and Rajasthan in a place called Ateli. That will have 500,000 saplings. So today we are self-sufficient in our own nurseries, and what we have realized is planting trees in a specific area, if we can grow the saplings there for a period of 6 months to a year, they are better acclimatized to the water, soil, all kind of conditions, so they root and fruit faster. And also the farmers know that these people are here for keeps. They're not here just to give us some saplings and take some photographs, put it on Facebook and go away. So that's the fruit trees planting activity, which is one of the major activities. In terms of mangrove, we started in 2018 with a very small 50,000 mangrove tree planting in the Sundarbans with the help of the Climate Reality Project, which is the Algo project. And we have progressed, and it's a very difficult terrain. My youngest son, who is doing forestry, I had sent him in 2019 to experience this. And so that was the second year in this undergraduate studies. And he says, Dad, in those 2 weeks that I was there, I learned survival skills. I said, what happened? He says, there could be a tiger in the water, there could be a crocodile in the water, and you're working in marshland trying to plant this, mangrove seedlings, and no power in those islands. So in those days, of course, power has come now. No power in those islands. So, entire night you spend trying to chase away all the mosquitoes who want to carry you away. So very, very difficult terrain. And as we have been seeing in the last 2-3 years, major parts of Calcutta, major parts of West Bengal, Calcutta and Odisha have survived because of whatever little mangroves still exist in those parts of the world. And in the foreseeable future, we are looking at planting, a few million, at least a few million mangroves, which won't be enough to save Calcutta 2030. They say Calcutta will be underwater, but let's hope that this picks up speed. And like Tejasri rightly pointed out, I was very fortunate to visit Vikhroli when I was still cutting trees. I was looking for funds from there was a VC firm based out of your campus there in Vikhroli. And my eyes just popped out. I was looking at the greenery. I had suddenly come out of near the airport. I was living in a hotel near the airport in Bombay. And I reached Vikhroli, and there were just miles and miles and square miles of sheer green abundance that one couldn't even imagine could exist somewhere in Bombay. And we do believe that if we work sincerely and with the farmers' help, and with the local, like Ramji said, with the local knowledge base that is available with the people, that ecosystems can be restored. It is not very difficult, and funding is available. But yes, if you go and tell a corporate that I do tree planting and I want money for it, that it's one of the most unsexiest areas for funding. Any corporate would like to put their pockets, put their hands into the pocket and take out any kind of money. It's a tough ask, but yes, I am sure that a lot of work can be done. I'm pretty optimistic about the future, that the large companies like PCF, Bernard Ricard, Shell, Nestle wants to work on what they call zero pollution at the logistics stage. That is, they want to plant trees where their factories are, etc., etc. They want to adapt entire villages and plant billions and billions of trees. The plans are still on paper. I'm sure it'll all come through one day, and the entire ecosystem will change. That's all I have to.
That's what we have been hoping for. Thank you, Tajmoon. Yes, the entire ecosystem should change. So I'll take it from there and go back to the discussion again. Yes, these are the things that we have been doing. interesting projects. Each of us have a story to share. Something has made an impact. We have a model to talk about. Ramji talked about the Bhuvan Center, Vikhroli, of course, massive project, and Sundarbans and other projects that you have been doing with corporates. They do make an impact, and we do have case studies, we do have stories to share. But moving forward, are these, let's just, as an individuals, if you look at our own projects, we have done something in some pocket and we had an impact. As an individual, we're sitting at home and we look at other corporates. We are also the consumers. We are just not part of these organizations. We're also consumers. We work for one company, we buy from another companies. In fact, everything that's coming to our homes. As an individual, do you all think that as corporates, they're doing enough? We have been looking at, say, sustainability targets, and companies are talking about they were talking about going carbon neutral by 2030. Now the targets have been moved ahead and they're talking about going carbon neutral by 2050. Some of the companies have gone water positive, but there are a lot more industries which are yet to even think about it or even talk about it. We even have a sustainability report out. There are only about 120, 140 good sustainability SGS standard reports that come out. There are other companies that are not started talking about it. Vivek Ji is here, Tata Power, of course. The power companies have a lot of carbon footprints, and it's very difficult to reach out and say maintain scope 3 targets for power companies or companies that are in oil and other such petroleum products. So as individuals, when we look at this, do you think it's possible for us to achieve, to have what we want, the kind of world where we are looking at, not even by 2030, but 2040, 2050 maybe? Any of those experiences that you have had with government, you have had with other corporates or non-government partners, where we have off-the-record conversation, whatever we'll do, we are heading towards something. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to maintain even the 2% rise in the carbon, or 2 degrees rise that we're talking about. We are even lowering our own targets now because they look unachievable. So your experiences, anybody can pitch in. Probably Ramji, you can come in. Raj, Vivek.
I'll wait for Ramji to come in, please.
Firstly, I'm very inspired by the stories I just heard. And there's certainly, in that sense, cause for optimism. Now, as an individual, as I said, maybe I'm not tuned into the system as well as I should be. But I don't hear too much from the senior people that I meet, whether it's in corporations or the bureaucracy and so on. I'm sure there are many people who are concerned, who are doing great work, as Raj and others have shown. But I'm not sure it has become pervasive in the discourse in terms of action, okay? Because some of these things, like take planting trees, they have a long gestation. By and large, I think our people tend to look for quick results. Okay? So long gestation means you have a far-sighted view of things and you anticipate potential problems and work. So whatever the reasons are, I'm not sure it has acquired an urgency that it probably needs to grab the attention of the powers that be in a very strong, visceral way. And if that happens, then there's no reason why we can't achieve whatever objectives we want to achieve. Now, the problem with all these things are there are huge trade-offs. He has addressed the problem of malnutrition and at the same time contributed to ecological distribution through the development through the fruit trees. But, I'll send you a presentation that a friend of mine, who's the chief scientist at Shell, made to MIT a couple of weeks ago. I'll send it to all of you. And there he talks about, solar energy. And the problem is land, availability of land. So there are all kinds of trade-offs that need to be made, which we are all aware of in this whole debate. And we'll have to take a position, hopefully an intelligent position, and make the right choices. So that's my sort of...
Great, makes sense. Thank you so much, Ramji. Vivek, would you like to comment for this?
Ranjan, is it okay if I...
Sure. See, actually,
Please go ahead.
think Vivek is in an area where he's getting low bandwidth and we're not being able to reach. So Vaishnavi, you wanted to come in and you wanted to speak something. Probably we can have you.
Yeah, the connectivity is not good, but yeah.
Sorry, so I just thought
Yeah, please.
So you have asked a very interesting question, Ranjan. That is it possible for corporates and for individuals who are working in the sustainability space to actually...
Can you introduce yourself first? Please go ahead.
Yes, so I'm Group Head of Corporate Communications and Sustainability at Tata Power.
Great, yes.
So I am from the more traditional side of the sustainability team, the corporate sustainability team. And since this subject was on ecosystem restoration, we had our subject matter expert, who is Mr. Vivek Vishal join in.
Right.
So I was here to supplement if need be. And I can see that he's having a little bit of a connectivity issue. So I thought I will bring in perspective from the larger aspect of it. So, very inspiring stories from across panel. To answer the very specific question and the perspective that Tata Power has of, is it possible for organizations and individuals working in the sustainability space to actually make a tangible difference, whether it is in the 2030 timeframe, 40-50, whatever time frame? I think the answer is a resounding yes, because action needs to happen at multiple levels. So it is not only organizations like United Nations, which is setting out sustainable development goals, but it is also the responsibility of private organizations to adapt those goals and, set targets. So like, for instance, Tata Power is one of the leading organizations which has done a SDG mapping and prioritization. So we have 10 prioritized SDGs on which we have taken 47 KPIs or very, very specific targets in the 2026 timeframe, which is our strategic horizon, 2030, 2040 and 2050 timeframe. In fact, Tata Power is one of the earliest organizations in the Indian utility space to commit to carbon neutrality by 2050. And in addition, I think we are transforming the way we do business. So we are moving from being a thermal business to being a clean and green organization. So we have a stated intent of phasing out thermal power as we reach end of life for our thermal units. We have already announced that we will not be adding any more thermal capacity to our portfolio. And we will have, in 2015, which is not so long back, we had only 15% clean and green capacity. Today, we start at 31% clean and green capacity. And that is going to become half our portfolio in the 2030 timeframe. So yes, change is possible. And if you put our minds to it, it is a change which can be accelerated through collective action. We are also looking at energy solutions to empower our customers. So we are not only looking at it from what we can do from a business perspective, but also taking our customers along on the journey. So we are a significant part in the e-mobility piece. So Tata Power is supporting the charging infrastructure which is being set up. Tata Motors is trying to bring in e-mobility. So as a group, we are trying to transform the way transportation is looked at. We are looking at rooftop solar as a solution. So I think one of the few sectors and companies which will be saying use less of my service and do more yourself, right? So we are in demand side management programs where we are asking the customer to use less power and be more energy efficient. We are doing distributed generation and asking customers to put up rooftop solar and generate their own electricity. We have in fact a joint venture with Rockefeller Foundation where we have committed to setting up microgrids across the rural and urban areas where energy reliability is an issue. So we already have 130 odd microgrids across the country and 68 more in the pipeline. And we are also, a significant part of our project is solar pumps, so that the rural area where agriculture needs to be supplemented and energy availability may be an issue. So through solar sources, water can be pumped in and agriculture can be supported.
Great
so
question. You answered
it.
I'll move on to other people. One quick question.
Yes.
Is there a possibility, like a layman, if I want to put up a solar power plant on my rooftop and I don't have any investment to make? Okay, just a layman I'm asking you. I say I have space, I have rooftop, Tata Power needs clean energy, I can give you my space. Can you come and put up a plant? Can some scheme be rolled out like this? Just a thought.
So there are two models for rooftop solar. Yeah. One is the OPEX model that you're talking about. Where the asset is owned by the organization and the space of the customer is used, and the other is the CAPEX model. So Tata Power is largely in the CAPEX model, but we do have OPEX model, plants also. And one more point which I missed out, Tata Power is also one of the 11 global organization and the only Indian representative with World Business Council for Sustainable Development who have set out an SDG roadmap. So yes, it is possible for all of us together to collectively make it.
Great, makes sense. Thank you so much, Vaishnavi, for all this information. I'll need some more information. Probably we'll write to you and connect, and we'll do a separate story on this. Padma probably is taking notes. I'll ask her to also reach out to you. Probably plan something around that. Especially there's because customers do not know much about how to go about solar and how to use their space and actually not just have solar for themselves, solar energy for themselves, but also distribute it amongst get it to the power companies. Maybe there can be an app just. Put in your number and ask for queries and you get all the information. Something like that can be initiated. Tejashri, going to your experiences, we will be winding up. We just have about 7 minutes left. So quickly, Tejashri, your experience, like what do you think as an individual, you think these goals from your experiences are achievable, attainable?
Yeah, it's a choice that today individuals have to make. And if you want to really have consumers making that choice, you also need to be able to provide that information to the consumer in terms of, how responsible is your product as an organization and why should they choose it. You definitely see a change in the current generation moving towards being more responsible consumers in terms of what they choose. But like I said, there is still quite a lack of information on the products. A lot of Indian companies even today struggle to comply to the basic regulations that are there on, say, plastic waste management, e-waste management. There are multiple, and India does have very good regulatory framework. The problem, as we know, is when it comes to implementation. But also, we see a struggle for industries to comply. I'm not saying large corporates, but we see a lot of SMEs, MSMEs still, not being able to very easily comply, and that's quite understandable in terms of sustainability of their business as well, and lack of knowledge internally within their system to do that. Thinking of sustainability beyond compliance is the next step. Once you put your house in order. But there is a huge opportunity for corporates to communicate. And as an individual, if I want to know what choice I make, I should know that which corporate is or what companies are offering. So when we started strategizing the good and green, it was doing good for the society and green for environment. So while doing good, it also we also decided that sustainability cannot be something which is running parallel to the business. It has to be an integrated part of the business. So while you green your processes and your campuses and areas around your operations, you also need to make your products green, because that is what is going to reach the consumers, and that is what is going to take your philosophy beyond your boundaries and spread it across, wherever you reach. And we do have a footprint across the country and even outside now, but that's where the responsible manufacturing and corporate production comes into picture. So 30% of our revenues today come from green products. So that's been a target. While you do the annual business plans or your strategic business plans, this is one of the targets that all the business units have to achieve. And they need to, and innovation plays a very important role in this for the corporates, because you constantly need to start innovating in your processes, in your entire ecosystem of business that you are developing. How do you rope in, the society with it? At the same time, how do you make all your processes take a life cycle approach in terms of understanding the impact and identifying those hotspots where you can actually make a contribution or reduce the hotspot. So that's been a philosophy for last 10 years. And like Vaishnavi was just mentioning, I think today all leading corporates are signing on to the global initiatives like EP100, doubling your productivity, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, targeting the 1.5 degree scenario for a business ambition. So all these we are also part of. So, but like you said, the challenge lies ahead, because we started our sustainability journey 10 years ago. Almost a decade has passed and all the low-hanging fruits are done. So now you need actually those investments which would take you to that other leap or take you to the other plane where, it would be more impactful. Obviously, there would have to be more investments in this, because it entails that now, and moving on to that next level.
Is it very difficult to convince the board primarily, or the shareholders that to invest in more in biodiversity or environmental projects?
Well, not yeah. I mean, see, the challenge comes again here in communication. You need to connect that biodiversity indicators with your business sustainability or risk. The moment it gets identified as an enterprise risk, or your business sustainability in the long term is going to be impacted because of degradation of biodiversity or ecosystem services that it is providing, it then start becoming easier. And for that, the indicator would be to take smaller steps in terms of your immediate impact. Say, like for example, if Godrej Ontario is dependent on wood, so is it sustainable to source any kind of wood? Even there is quite an awareness in the civil society today.
Understood, Tejasvi. It's coming back to Ramji's point when he said it's like first we have to show them the short-term gains and then talk about the long-term gains, and then move on and get the investments.
Yes.
Raj, you are there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. I have to log off in a minute. I have another.
So you have a minute to speak. Yes, go ahead.
I see. Early days in the Indian understanding of how ecosystems have to. Of course, the giants are already been there. The Godrejas and the Tatas have already been there. So a lot of people who come out of these organizations and found or join other organizations are showing the way. The sad part is some of the larger polluters in India, the automobile companies, the two-wheeler companies, the petrol companies, the fuel companies, plastic companies, still haven't joined the bandwagon full-heartedly. They're doing a lot of activities which are more, I would say, to be, to use a harsh word, whimsical of their boards rather than well thought out long-term solutions. And I do believe that like Tejasvi pointed out and like Ramji pointed out, the consumer or the next generation of consumers and the next generation of consumers after that are going to be much more prudent in their choices than you and I have been. And that gives me great hope, because we weren't very sure about, we were probably carried away more by the marketing and the advertising that was happening across the world and across the country than from what is today a prudent choice to make. My family, my children, without my saying so, they tell me, Dad, switch off that light, switch off that fan, you don't need an air conditioner. Things which are much more drilled into their generation, I guess, either at the education level or at the kind of reading that they do. And hence, I'm extremely hopeful that we are going to be better off 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line. I hope mankind is still around. People talk about saving the environment. I don't think environment needs any saving. I think it's we human beings who need to be saved. Yeah, I need to log off now, Ranjan. Thank you so much for the fantastic panel. And thank you so much. Wonderful talking to all of you.
Thank you, Rajmohan. Yes. Does anybody want to share anything else, like any thought, any idea, any experience, any anecdote that anybody would want to share? And then probably I'll just make the concluding mark. It's 5:01. Ramji, Vaishnavi.
Ranjan, I will need to log off.
Sure, Ramji. Yes, thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Pleasure meeting everyone, and I'll be in touch.
Great.
On the email. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ramji. Yes.
Sure. Thanks.
In fact, it was a very interesting session. Yes, I want to talk about the cover story that we have done. I just ended up reading a lot of sustainability reports, and I was wondering how many people actually pick up the sustainability report or download it from the company and go and read it, apart from the sustainability teams and the people who have been working on it. And if I have to share my experiences as also the picture that is there on the Cosmos cover, so it's like a red tower which is being painted green by a person. So that's how the sustainability looks like. I'm not talking about the Godrejas or Tatas, because these are the organizations that have to talk more about their sustainability initiatives, sustainability interventions, and they have a lot of lessons and stories to share with other corporations who have yet to join the bandwagon, or have to start talking about or start investing in sustainability initiatives as such. There is a lot to be done. So yes, 2030 looks difficult. But obviously, it doesn't look impossible if everybody comes on board with non-government organizations. The governments take it seriously, and it becomes something like a war. Just like we are fighting the COVID, environmental action is needed on that front as well. Like something similar has to happen. It has to be emergency fight against the climate change that we've been talking about. So more of these conversations should continue to happen. We want Godrej, Tatas, and all other companies to share more stories, and stories would come only if you take action around it. Thank you so much, everybody. It was an interesting session and happy environment day to all of us again.